So with Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 269, the story at this point is inching closer and closer towards the finish line to wrap everything up, and it's at this point that as the story is drawing a line in the sand, you're either going to love the story or you are going to hate the story. There's not going to be any in between here. If you're on team Yuji and Nobara and Yuta and Ui, then you probably are learning how this has turned out, and if you're someone who wanted to see the merger take place, which would have resulted in Sukuna basically winning, and you're just a Sukuna fan period, then chances are you're going to hate the direction this is going. Essentially, the series has been giving us all these heartbreaking deaths. It has now pulled the reverse Uno card, and we now learn that characters who we thought were dead, that the story led you to believe are dead, are actually alive, and it's because basically Ui and Shoko, they have been coming in as clutch as they have, which is why Kusakabe and Higuruma, they are now alive, which that's going to be the source of a controversy for sure. So we open up with Yuji and Fushiguro and Nobara, and they're joining up with Maki and Yuta and the others, and we see Maki, for a lack of better words, she isn't too pleased with Yuta, and she was the one who was cussing out Yuta at the end of the last chapter. They're all gathered in what appears to be a candy shop, and Maki, she is pissed because of the whole situation that Yuta was in and how nonchalantly he's taken the whole situation, acting as if everything is fine, which it is, but at the same time, her reaction, it makes sense given how emotional her response was to Yuta's plan to swap bodies with Gojo as a nuclear option. It showed us that she wasn't on board with this plan at all. In fact, she even alludes to the fact that had Yuta been more serious, they could have won this battle with Sukuna a lot easier, which we're definitely going to touch on that later. So in short, Yuta is back in his body. He's not in Gojo's body. The reason for this is that Rika was holding Yuta's dead body a few chapters ago. She was acting as a defensive manner to support Yuta, his body, by using continuous amounts of reverse curse technique on his body, all for the purpose of supporting Yuta, so that when Kenjaku's curse technique hit its limits, the worry about Yuta being stuck in Gojo's body, it wouldn't be an issue any longer, because due to Rika's actions, they were basically able to avoid that whole very weird situation. The only real downside that Yuta has right now is that he does have those scars on his head that are from that operation that Shoko had to do when she was doing that whole brain swap process, which that's to be expected. We also learned that there are lingering effects to Fushiguro's body as a result of Sukuna versus Gojo. Basically, Fushiguro still feels the effects of Gojo's unlimited void from that battle, which explains why he was still recovering in the last chapter. We also get the interaction with Kusakabe, who is alive because of Ui's efforts to get his body out on the battlefield and into Shoko's hands in order to heal him. Kusakabe reveals that he wasn't a fan of the whole idea that Gojo was basically sparing Yuji, and had it been up to him, he was all for having Yuji killed since he was Sukuna's vessel back then. Kusakabe isn't the only one who survived that battle with Sukuna, so too was Higuruma, and his body, it was also teleported away by Ui, which means that the MVPs of the final arc in terms of the support cast are basically Yuta for the plan that set them up for the chance to win, Ui for his curse technique coming in clutch, which got every right to brag about that, and then you got Shoko for healing everyone, then you got Nobara, who woke up at the last second, got the participation trophy award in order to assist Yuji. Based on what we have, it appears as if Sukuna, while he was invested in Higuruma's potential, he wasn't fighting him at 100% seriously, so his attack had stopped short of killing him, which is how Ui was able to come in and get the save here. The story then fills in more gaps for us, typical of a resolution chapter that is meant to serve as an anchor to the ending. We get the perspective from characters like Mei and Kusakabe on certain parts of the story, as well as some important explanations for things that weren't fully explained during the final battle, because at the time, due to the fast-paced nature of the final battle, it wasn't the time to start explaining the things that we were seeing. This leads to some very interesting and controversial reflections, like Maki saying one of the quiet parts out loud. Like, first, that she should have been the one to assist in the surprise attack on Kenjaku, and then ask why didn't they use Inomaki's curse speech to free Sukuna and then just swoop in with Higuruma's executioner's blade to kill him, which throw 100 points on the board for Maki, because more likely than not, as you were going through the fight and you're watching everything unfold, you likely came to that same question. The answer given to us by the narrator is that curse speech is only good for one shot. So once the recording is played, it counts as a cursed speech command, and Panda and Kusakabe remarked that Sukuna's power level at that point in the fight, it was too much of a variable in order to attempt to use it. It would be too risky and make the situation too complex, which added with that extra info basically means they were worried if they try to use that trump card too soon and Sukuna could muster up enough strength, they might have wasted their only chance, which to a degree, it makes sense. There's logic to it. Then you also have Higuruma, the lawyer, who as a lawyer is going to have a high IQ. He reveals that he was the one who said it was a bad idea to use Inumaki's cursed speech technique in that moment, like how Maki was suggesting, due to the fact that his domain does not allow for violence and that it would have been easier and better to wait to use it for Okkotsu's domain expansion instead. However, it does invite a question of after Gojo and Kashimo were taken out, did Gege utilize the characters in the cast in the best way? As in, was this attack pattern to take down Sukuna? And even when you add in Yuta being needed to take down Kenjaku following the Takaba fight via what Todo says about using Boogie Woogie to get Yuta out there to do the final blow, it makes you wonder, did they make a mistake in the fact that the characters themselves are admitting that they probably could have changed some things around, and it's refreshing, but it's also a frustrating admission. But some of it does just show you that for as powerful as they are still kids. And even the more experienced adults in the room, they had issues with the whole thing. Just shows you that none of these characters are perfect. This is even more so when we get to Maki, where she's like, hey, if Miguel would have been there at the start, this would have been a much easier fight. Basically saying we could have just jumped Sukuna. Even if Hikari had to separate Arame from Sukuna like they planned, they could have just jumped Sukuna. On one hand, you do see what Gege's trying to do here. Justify Gojo fighting alone, which that is in character for him to do. That's part of Gojo's tragic character flaw. But this resolution chapter, it has kind of opened the door for interpretation as to whether or not this might have been a mistake for some of these characters, especially just given a big part of Gojo's character arc was wanting to groom the next generation, several of whom, like say Yuji and Fushiguro and Okkotsu and Hikari, and even Maki, they're people who he thought had the potential to either get on his level or surpass him, or he saw extreme potential in them. It would have been a good conclusion to his arc if they just would have jumped Sukuna alongside him, but his character flaw, again, is his overconfidence, and that's why you have to have him do a one-on-one fight. So narratively, I understand the reason for it, but Gege does acknowledge maybe we should have just all jumped this guy Sukuna from the start, and I would argue that is something a little bit more fitting for Sukuna's character, just given how he was presented. Another interesting thing that we get here in terms of the reveal is that this whole time the group, it was gathered around watching Gojo versus Sukuna. They were physically inside of Rika when this whole thing was taking place, so they weren't inside of a building outside the radius per se, but they were inside of Rika and basically watching the whole fight via Rika's eyes. So that's what those teleprompters were, which that's another questionable reveal because of the proximity to the battlefield. It just makes you look at the whole situation and go, Okkotsu was right this whole time. Once Yuta saw Gojo was losing, since they were right there on the battlefield watching, Yuta wanted to go out and fight. And it wasn't just because he didn't want to go into the whole plan B of having to take over Gojo's body, but if they would have jumped him, they probably could have turned the tables in a way that prevented Gojo from dying, which means that they wouldn't have needed to even do the body swap thing. But then you also have the fact that you have to rely on Takaba to take out Kenjaku, which was likely, but that goes back to Maki's point that she should have been the one to have Todo use Boogie Woogie on to get into that position, but Todo says that they couldn't have really done that, and even if they did, they really couldn't because Yuta and Rika were the only ones among them who could have handled Kenjaku's horde of cursed spirits that he unleashed after losing. So this is really Gege doubling down and saying there are some issues on how Sukuna was taken down, but logically this was the only path forward. Now the chapter then shifts over to the reveal of the lore behind the simple domain and the new shadow style clan, while simultaneously closing up the corruption storyline that we got early on in Jujutsu Kaisen when it comes to all the major clans. We were told that the new shadow style had changed over time due to the use of binding vows, and the students weren't allowed to decline orders from the leader, and there were restrictions that were put on who could learn it. Basically, they monopolized the technique. Basically, Mei Megumi, she gets her hands dirty at the end of the chapter by confronting the clan head, and we learn that the clan head was using the powers to drain the lives of the disciples in order to extend her own lifespan. And Megumi basically says that she herself values money and power. Even she knows that the ways that the clans are doing things is wrong. So the narrator states that Megumi basically pulls a Gojo and kills the head of the clan inside that candy shop. This goes back to the whole corruption angle that we saw with the Jujutsu families and the systems all throughout the story, and Gege's telling us as readers this is a hard reset on Jujutsu society, and narratively it does track. The 3-bit clans, they were corrupt. They're all dead now. The higher ups in the Jujutsu world, they were corrupt, and we saw how Gojo handled that situation. Maki went into beast mode and killed the Zenin clan members. Kenjaku killed off a lot of the Kamo clan members. Gojo got killed by Sukuna, and he was the only member of the Gojo clan. So basically, this is Gege saying the old guard, it has been taken care of. It's a hard reset, and what Gojo said about the next generation leading is finally happening. We're in for a reset, and these next 2 chapters are likely going to show more of the changes to Jujutsu society as we enter into this new era.